The dust-laden winds of Arizona territory carried more than just the scent of rain as Beatrice Barlow staggered along the outskirts of Randsburg, one hand clutching her swollen belly, the other gripping a tattered carpet bag containing everything she owned in the world. Blood trickled from her split lip, mingling with tears that carved clean paths through the dirt on her face. 6 months pregnant and desperate, she had fled in the dead of night from the man who had promised to love her, but instead had shown her only the back of his hand. The year was 1882, and the small mining town of Randsburg was nestled in the foothills where opportunity and desperation often walked hand in hand. Beatrice had been walking for hours, having jumped from the slow-moving train when it stopped to take on water 5 miles back. Her husband would be looking for her by now, his rage building with every passing hour. The thought alone made her stumble faster despite her exhaustion. The first fat drops of rain began to fall as Beatrice spotted a weathered signpost. Ironwood Ranch 1 mile. Her feet, blistered and aching in boots that had once belonged to her mother, carried her down the rutted path. Each step was a silent prayer that whoever owned this ranch might offer her just one night's shelter before she continued her journey to nowhere in particular, anywhere her husband couldn't find her. The clouds broke open just as the ranch house came into view, a sturdy 2-story structure with a wide porch and a barn nearby large enough to suggest prosperity. Beatrice hesitated at the edge of the property, rain plastering her dress to her frame, highlighting her condition for anyone who cared to look. Pride told her to turn back, but the baby kicked inside her, a reminder that her decisions were no longer just for herself. With trembling legs, she approached the house, climbing the 3 wooden steps to the porch. Her knuckles had barely grazed the door when it swung open, revealing a tall man with shoulders broad enough to fill the doorframe. His face, partially obscured by a neatly trimmed beard the color of wheat fields, registered surprise then concern. "Madam?" His voice was deep but gentle, nothing like the harsh tones she had grown accustomed to. Beatrice swayed, darkness creeping at the edges of her vision. "Please." The last thing she remembered was the stranger lunging forward as her knees buckled beneath her. Ruben Ironwood had seen his fair share of desperate people in his 32 years. The war, the lawlessness that followed, the harsh realities of carving a life out of the Arizona territory all had paraded examples of human suffering before him. But the pregnant woman who had collapsed on his porch struck something deep within him that he'd thought long buried. He carried her inside, careful not to jostle her too much, and laid her on the sofa in his sitting room. Mrs. Hernandez, his housekeeper, quickly brought towels and hot water, clucking her tongue at the state of the young woman. "She's been beaten, Senor Ironwood, Mrs." Hernandez whispered, gently cleaning the dried blood from Beatrice's face. "And not for the first time, I think." Ruben's jaw tightened. "Get Doc Willoughby. Tell him it's urgent," as Mrs. Hernandez bustled out. Beatrice's eyes fluttered, open eyes the color of summer sage, filled with terror as she realized she was indoors with a strange man looming over her. "Easy now," Ruben said, stepping back to give her space. "You're safe here. I'm Ruben Ironwood. This is my ranch." Beatrice struggled to sit up, one arm instinctively wrapping around her belly. "I'm sorry to trouble you, Mr. Ironwood. I just needed. I'll be on my way once the rain stops." "You're not troubling anyone, miss." "Mrs. Barlow, Beatrice Barlow." The words felt like stones in her mouth. That name tied her to him, to Jeremy Barlow, the man whose ring she still wore but whose house she would never return to. "Mrs. Barlow, you're in no condition to go anywhere tonight. I've sent for the doctor." No doctors, please." The panic in her voice was unmistakable. "He'll find me." Ruben knelt beside the sofa, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Who will find you, Mrs. Barlow?" The way Beatrice's hand trembled as she touched her bruised cheek told him all he needed to know. "Your husband did this to you." It wasn't a question. Beatrice looked away, shame coloring her features. He wasn't always like this. When we married last year, he was kind. But then he lost his job at the bank, started drinking. She trailed off, the story as old as time itself. "And now you're running." She nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek. "I couldn't stay, not with the baby coming. I couldn't let my child grow up in a house like that." Ruben stood, his decision made. "You'll stay here, Mrs. Barlow, at least until you've recovered your strength. My ranch is remote enough that you'll have time to figure out your next steps." Gratitude and suspicion warred in Beatrice's expression. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Ruben's eyes darkened with memories he usually kept locked away. "Let's just say I know what it's like to need a safe harbor in a storm." Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Hernandez returned with Dr. Willoughby, an elderly man with kind eyes and a discreet manner. "Mrs. Barlow isn't feeling well, Doc," Ruben said, catching the doctor's eye meaningfully. "Perhaps you could examine her while I see to the evening chores." Dr. Willoughby nodded, understanding the unspoken message. "Of course, Mr. Ironwood. Mrs. Barlow and I will get acquainted." Ruben left them, striding through the rain to the barn where his foreman, Frank Carter, was checking on a mare about to foal. "We've got a guest, Frank," Ruben said, removing his hat and slapping it against his leg to shake off the water. "Mrs. Barlow will be staying with us for a while." Frank, a man of few words who had ridden with Ruben since the war, simply nodded. "Trouble, the usual kind, husband with heavy hands. Want me to post a watch?" Ruben considered this. "Not yet. Let's not alarm her, but keep your eyes open when you're in town. If anyone comes asking about a pregnant woman traveling alone, let me know." By the time Ruben returned to the house, Dr. Willoughby was preparing to leave. He pulled Ruben aside on the porch, his voice low. "The young lady will be fine, physically at least. The baby seems healthy despite everything. But she's undernourished and exhausted. She needs rest, good food, and no stress for a while." The doctor sighed. "And she needs not to be found by the man who did this to her. Those bruises aren't new, Ruben. Some are healing, some fresh." "She'll be safe here," Ruben promised. "I know she will. That's why I told her she should stay put until the baby comes. It's too risky for her to travel in her condition." Dr. Willoughby clapped Ruben on the shoulder. "You're a good man, Ruben Ironwood." Ruben wasn't so sure about that. Good men didn't wake up drenched in sweat from nightmares 15 years after the war ended. Good men weren't still haunted by the things they'd done, the people they'd failed to save. But he could offer sanctuary to a woman who had nowhere else to turn, and maybe that counted for something. When he re-entered the house, Mrs. Hernandez was showing Beatrice to the guest room upstairs. "There's a bath drawn for you, Mrs. Barlow," the housekeeper was saying. "And I've laid out a nightgown that should accommodate your condition. It belonged to Mr. Ironwood's sister when she was expecting." "Thank you," Beatrice said softly, her eyes meeting Ruben's over Mrs. Hernandez's shoulder. "Thank you both. I don't know how I'll repay such kindness." "No need," Ruben said. "Just focus on getting your strength back. We can talk about what comes next when you're feeling better." That night, as rain lashed against the windows and thunder rolled across the Arizona sky, Ruben sat in his study, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. He could hear the occasional creak of floorboards from above as his guest moved about her room. A stranger under his roof, carrying another stranger's child, fleeing a man who had promised to cherish her. The irony wasn't lost on him. 10 years he'd spent building this ranch, focusing on nothing but work, keeping everyone at arm's length except for Frank and Mrs. Hernandez. 10 years of solitude by choice, and now his carefully constructed peace had been disrupted by a pair of terrified green eyes and a silent plea for help. Ruben tossed back the whiskey in one swallow. Tomorrow, he decided, he would ride into town and make some discreet inquiries about Jeremy Barlow. It never hurt to know what kind of enemy might be coming for you. Beatrice couldn't remember the last time she had slept so deeply. The bed in Ruben Ironwood's guest room was soft. The linen smelled of sunshine, and for the first time in months, she hadn't fallen asleep fearing what morning might bring. She woke to sunlight streaming through curtains that danced in the gentle breeze from the open window. For a moment, she allowed herself to simply breathe, one hand resting on her rounded belly. "We're safe for now, little one," she whispered. The baby responded with a flutter of movement as if understanding. 6 months along, and already this child had endured more than any innocent should have to. Beatrice had married Jeremy believing his promises of love and security. The banker's son, with the charming smile and impeccable manners, had swept her off her feet, proposing just 3 months after they met at a church social. Her parents, struggling farmers, had been thrilled at the match, seeing it as Beatrice's chance for a better life. How quickly that dream had soured. Jeremy's charm had masked a brittle pride and a temper that flared at the slightest provocation. When the bank failed and he lost his position, that temper had found its outlet in Beatrice. The first time he struck her, he had wept afterward, begging forgiveness, swearing it would never happen again. She had believed him because she needed to, because admitting she had made such a terrible mistake was too painful to contemplate. Then she had discovered she was pregnant, and for a few weeks, joy had returned to their home. Jeremy had been ecstatic, treating her with the tenderness of their courtship days. But his moods were mercurial, and one night, after drinking with friends who still had money for such luxuries, he had come home in a rage, accusing her of trapping him with a child when he could least afford it. That night, as she had lain curled on her side, protecting her unborn child from his fists, Beatrice had made her decision. She would not bring a child into this house of fear. She would not become her mother, making excuses for bruises and broken bones. She would run as far as her feet would carry her, and she would never look back. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Mrs. Barlow, are you awake?" Mrs. Hernandez called. "Yes, please come in." The housekeeper entered, carrying a tray laden with food, eggs, bacon, biscuits still steaming, and a pot of tea. "You need to eat for the baby," she said, setting the tray on a small table by the window. "Mr. Ironwood asked me to tell you that he has gone to town but will return by midday. He said you should make yourself comfortable, and that Frank, that's the foreman, is nearby if you need anything." Beatrice nodded, suddenly self-conscious in her borrowed nightgown. "Mrs. Hernandez, I wonder if you might have any clothes I could wear. I left with only what I'm carrying and—" "Say no more. Mr. Ironwood's sister left some things behind when she moved to San Francisco with her husband. She was a bit taller than you, but we can make adjustments." Mrs. Hernandez's dark eyes softened. "You are not the first woman to need a fresh start, Mrs. Barlow. Nor will you be the last. Eat now. We'll sort out the rest after." After breakfast, Beatrice bathed again, a luxury she hadn't enjoyed in months, and dressed in a simple skirt and blouse that Mrs. Hernandez had altered for her. The clothes were of better quality than anything she had owned before her marriage, made of fine cotton with delicate stitching. Feeling more human than she had in ages, Beatrice ventured downstairs. The Ironwood Ranch house was spacious and well appointed, with polished wooden floors and large windows that let in ample light. It spoke of prosperity but wasn't ostentatious. Photographs lined the hallway, a stern-faced couple who must be Ruben's parents, a young woman with his same wheat-colored hair who was likely his sister, and several of Ruben himself, from boyhood to a man in a Union Army uniform, looking far too young to bear the weight of war. His father built this place, Mrs. Hernandez said, appearing beside her so suddenly that Beatrice startled. Came out from Tennessee in '48 after gold was discovered in California. Never made it that far, though. Fell in love with this valley and decided to raise cattle instead. Ruben was born right here in this house in 1850. And his parents, Beatrice asked, noting the dates on the photograph frame. Both gone now. His mother passed when he was 12, consumption. His father held on until just after Ruben came back from the war. Heart gave out, they say, but I think it was grief. His younger brother Nathaniel didn't come home. Beatrice studied the photograph of young Ruben in uniform, barely more than a boy with eyes that had seen too much. And his sister. Margaret lives in San Francisco with her husband and 3 children, visits once a year, usually for Christmas. Mrs. Hernandez straightened a frame that was slightly askew. Ruben keeps to himself mostly, runs the ranch, does business in town when needed but doesn't socialize much. Some folks think him standoffish, but he's just careful with his trust. The front door opened then, and Ruben himself entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. He paused when he saw Beatrice, something unreadable flashing across his features before he composed himself. Mrs. Barlow, good to see you up and about. I trust you slept well. Very well, thank you, Mr. Ironwood, and please call me Beatrice. After your kindness, formality seems unnecessary. A slight smile lifted the corner of his mouth. Beatrice, then, and I'm Ruben to my friends. Are we friends, Mr. Ironwood? The question slipped out before she could stop it. His eyes, the color of twilight sky, held her steadily. I believe we could be in time. Mrs. Hernandez cleared her throat discreetly. I'll prepare lunch, she said, heading toward the kitchen. I brought something for you, Ruben said once they were alone. He reached into his saddlebag and produced a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. It's nothing fancy, but I thought you might need it. Beatrice unwrapped the package to find a journal bound in soft leather with a pencil tucked into the spine. I noticed you didn't have much with you, Ruben explained, suddenly looking uncomfortable. Thought you might like somewhere to put your thoughts. The simple gift brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Jeremy had given her jewelry, dresses, even a small piano for their parlor, all things that showcased his wealth and status. But in all their time together, he had never once given her something that acknowledged her inner life, her thoughts, her dreams. Thank you, she said softly. It's perfect. An awkward silence fell between them, broken when Ruben cleared his throat. Doc Willoughby said you shouldn't exert yourself too much, but a bit of gentle exercise would be good for you and the baby. I thought after lunch I might show you around the ranch if you're feeling up to it. The prospect of fresh air and open space was too tempting to resist. I'd like that very much. The Ironwood Ranch was larger than Beatrice had initially realized. From the gentle rise behind the house, she could see cattle grazing in the distance, a creek winding its way through the property, and mountains blue with distance on the horizon. It's beautiful, she said, one hand shading her eyes from the afternoon sun. Ruben stood beside her, tall and solid as the oak trees that dotted his land. It's hard country but honest, gives back what you put into it. They walked slowly, Ruben matching his stride to her careful pace. He pointed out the various buildings, the bunkhouse where the ranch hands stayed, the smokehouse, the springhouse where dairy was kept cool. Everything was well maintained, speaking to the pride he took in his land. How many men do you employ? Beatrice asked as they passed the corral where several horses watched them curiously. 8 regular hands, more during roundup and branding. Frank Carter's my foreman, you'll meet him at supper. Been with me since the war. Mrs. Hernandez mentioned you fought. You seem young to have been in the war between the states. A shadow crossed his face. Lied about my age. Was 15 when I enlisted, told them I was 18. My father was against it, said Arizona had its own battles without borrowing others, but my brother and I were full of foolish notions about glory and adventure. His voice hardened. We learned better fast enough. Beatrice didn't press. She understood all too well how some memories were better left undisturbed. As they approached the barn, a man emerged leading a magnificent chestnut mare. He nodded respectfully to Ruben, then turned curious eyes to Beatrice. Mrs. Barlow, this is Frank Carter. Frank, Mrs. Beatrice Barlow, who'll be our guest for a while. Frank was shorter than Ruben but powerfully built, with graying hair and a scar that ran from his right temple to his jaw. Despite his intimidating appearance, his eyes were kind. Madam, he said with a slight bow. Any friend of Ruben's is welcome here. Thank you, Mr. Carter. Just Frank, madam. We don't stand much on ceremony around here. He turned to Ruben. That stallion you were looking at in town, owner's willing to sell, says he'll bring him by next week for you to inspect. Good. We need fresh bloodlines if we're going to expand the horse breeding operation. Ruben gestured to the mare. This is Penny, pride of our stable. She's expecting a foal any day now. Beatrice approached the mare cautiously. The horse regarded her with liquid brown eyes, then stretched out her neck, snuffling at Beatrice's outstretched hand. She likes you, Frank said, sounding surprised. Usually takes her time warming up to strangers. Perhaps she recognizes a kindred spirit, Ruben suggested quietly. Another mother-to-be. Beatrice stroked the mare's velvety nose, feeling a connection with the animal that transcended species, both of them carrying new life, both dependent on the care of others for their well-being. Can I come see her again? She asked. Anytime, Ruben said. In fact, if you're interested, you're welcome to be present when she foals. It's a remarkable thing to witness, the beginning of a new life. The genuine warmth in his voice caught her off guard. This man, who by his own admission kept to himself, was offering to share something he clearly found meaningful. It was a small gesture, perhaps, but it touched something in Beatrice that had been dormant for too long. I'd like that, she said. They continued their tour, ending at a small family cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch. Here lay Ruben's parents, grandparents, and a stone for his brother Nathaniel, though his body rested somewhere in Virginia. My father always said a man should be able to see his life's work from his final resting place, Ruben said, removing his hat as they stood before the graves. He built something that will outlast him. I hope to do the same. Beatrice thought of her own parents, still working the small farm where she had grown up, struggling against drought and debt. They had received her letter by now, the one she had posted from the train station before fleeing, explaining that she had left Jeremy but not why, asking them not to tell him where she had gone. She wondered if they were worried, if they understood her reasons, if they had kept her secret. Do you have family somewhere? Ruben asked, as if reading her thoughts. My parents farm near Prescott. I have 2 younger brothers, both working the land with my father. She hesitated. I wrote to them before I left, but I couldn't tell them where I was going. I couldn't risk Jeremy finding out. Your husband, is he the type to come looking for you? The question sent a chill through her despite the warm afternoon. Yes, she answered honestly. Not because he loves me, but because in his mind I belong to him, like a horse or a pocket watch. He doesn't take kindly to losing his possessions. Ruben's expression darkened. Did you go far enough? From Prescott, I mean. I hope so. I took the train to Flagstaff, then south. Randsburg seemed far enough and small enough that I might disappear for a while. She wrapped her arms around herself. I should move on soon. I've already imposed on your hospitality too much, and I won't bring trouble to your door. You're not going anywhere, Ruben said firmly. Not until that baby is safely delivered and you're strong enough to travel, if that's what you still want. As for trouble, his hand unconsciously moved to the gun at his hip. I've handled worse. The conviction in his voice should have frightened her, this near stranger declaring she would stay, making decisions for her as Jeremy had done. But instead, she felt a curious sense of relief. For the first time since discovering she was pregnant, Beatrice didn't feel entirely alone. As they walked back to the house, the sun beginning its descent toward the horizon, Beatrice felt something unfamiliar unfurling in her chest. Hope. Small and fragile, but undeniably present, the days settled into a gentle rhythm. Beatrice rested when she needed to, but insisted on helping Mrs. Hernandez with household tasks when she could. She discovered that purposeful work, done willingly, could be healing. She learned to make sourdough bread, to preserve the peaches from the orchard, to darn socks with such fine stitches that the mend was nearly invisible. In the evenings, she sat on the porch with Ruben, watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in hues of orange and purple. Sometimes they talked. He told her about his cattle operation, his plans for expanding the horse breeding business, his occasional legal battles with the railroad. She shared stories of her childhood, her love of books, her dreams of one day seeing the ocean. Other times they simply sat in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts but drawing comfort from the other's presence. These quiet moments were, to Beatrice, the most precious. With Jeremy, silence had been dangerous, a harbinger of storms to come. With Ruben, it was peaceful, a shared respite from the world's demands. 3 weeks after her arrival, Beatrice was in the kitchen helping Mrs. Hernandez prepare dinner when Frank burst in, his usually calm demeanor replaced with excitement. "Penny's foaling," he announced. "Ruben thought you'd want to know." Beatrice wiped her hands on her apron. "Is it going well, so far? Better come quick if you want to see." Mrs. Hernandez shoot her out. Go, I will finish here. Some things a woman should see before her own time comes." The walk to the barn seemed to take forever, though Frank assured her they weren't rushing because everything was progressing normally. "First foals can take time," he explained. "But Penny's strong, and Ruben's delivered more foals than most veterinarians in these parts." Inside the barn, Ruben knelt in the straw beside Penny, who lay on her sides heaving with contractions. He looked up when Beatrice entered, his face lighting with a smile that transformed his usually serious features. "You're just in time," he said, gesturing for her to join him. "We can see the foal's front hooves already." Beatrice knelt beside him, marveling at the miracle unfolding before her. Penny seemed calm despite her labor, trusting the humans who attended her. Ruben's hands were gentle but confident as he checked the foal's position, murmuring encouragement to the mare. "There's the nose," he said softly as a tiny muzzle appeared. "That's it, girl. You're doing wonderfully." Beatrice held her breath as the foal's head emerged, then its shoulders. With one final, powerful contraction, Penny delivered her baby into the world, a gangly, wet creature that lay stunned for a moment before taking its first breath. Tears sprang to Beatrice's eyes as the foal raised its head, blinking at the world it had just entered. Ruben cleared the membrane from its nostrils, checked that it was breathing properly, then sat back, allowing mother and baby their first moments together. "A colt," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A fine, strong boy." They watched as Penny began to clean her foal, her tongue rough with maternal devotion. The colt, coat dark with birthing fluids but already showing signs of his mother's chestnut coloring, attempted to rise on wobbly legs, falling and trying again with stubborn determination. "He's perfect," Beatrice whispered. "Yes, he is." Ruben's eyes, when she turned to him, weren't on the foal but on her face. The intensity of his gaze made her cheeks warm. On the third attempt, the colt managed to stand, legs splayed but holding. His next goal was clear, finding his mother's milk. They laughed together as he bumped and searched along Penny's side, the mare patiently guiding him with gentle nudges until he found what he was seeking. "Life finds a way," Ruben said softly. "No matter how it begins, how uncertain the path it perseveres." Beatrice knew he wasn't just talking about the foal. Her hand moved to her belly where her own child grew stronger each day. "Yes," she agreed, "it does." The moment was broken by Frank calling from outside the stall. "Everything okay in there?" "Perfect," Ruben called back. "We have a healthy colt. I'll tell the men. They've been placing bets on whether it'd be a colt or filly." Frank's footsteps retreated, leaving them alone with the new mother and her baby. Ruben stood, offering Beatrice his hand. "We should give them some time alone now. First bonding is important." His hand was warm and strong, calloused from years of ranch work. Beatrice found she didn't want to let go, even after she was on her feet. Something had shifted between them in the sacred space of new life. Ruben seemed to feel it too, his hand lingering in hers a moment longer than necessary. When he finally released her, it was with reluctance. "What do you think we should name him?" The question startled her. "Me. Surely that's your decision. You were here for his birth." "Seems only right you should have a say in his name." Beatrice considered the foal, now nursing contentedly. "Hope," she said at last, "because that's what he represents. Hope for the future." Ruben's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Hope it is, then." That night after dinner, Beatrice wrote in her journal about the foal's birth, trying to capture in words the wonder she had felt. She was so absorbed in her writing that she didn't hear Ruben approach until he spoke. "I've been thinking," he said, startling her, "about your situation." Beatrice closed her journal, suddenly wary. These past weeks had been a reprieve, but reality couldn't be held at bay forever. "Yes." Ruben sat in the chair opposite her, his expression serious. "Your husband Jeremy, is it? He has legal rights to you and to your child when it's born." A cold knot formed in her stomach. "I know. There might be a way around that." Ruben leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees. "I have a friend in town, Judge Harmon, known him for years. He might be able to help, maybe find grounds for annulment or divorce that would protect you and the baby." Hope warred with practicality in Beatrice's heart. "Even if that were possible, it would mean going to court. Jeremy would find me." "Not necessarily. There are ways to file papers discreetly. And if he did come," Ruben's jaw tightened, "he'd find you're not alone anymore." The implication hung in the air between them. Ruben was offering more than legal advice. He was offering protection, a shield against the man who had made her life a nightmare. "Why?" she asked, the question that had been on her lips since that first day. "Why would you do this for me?" Ruben was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on some middle distance as if seeing things Beatrice couldn't. "When I was in the war," he finally said, "there was a woman in a small town in Tennessee. Her husband was fighting for the Confederacy, and while he was gone, some Union soldiers' men wearing the same uniform as me, they hurt her. Badly. My unit came through town after, and I found her trying to hang herself from a tree in her yard." Beatrice's breath caught in her throat. "I stopped her, got her down, tried to help, but the damage was done, not just to her body but to her soul. She couldn't bear to look at me, kept flinching away from my uniform. All I could do was find a neighbor woman to stay with her, make sure the local doctor looked after her. His voice roughened. I've often wondered what became of her, if she found a way to live with what had happened. If anyone ever made her feel safe again, understanding dawned. So I'm your atonement. For this woman you couldn't truly help, Ruben looked up sharply. No, you're not an atonement or a charity case, you're. He struggled for words. You're someone who deserved better than what life handed you. Someone brave enough to take control of your own destiny despite the risks. Someone I've come to. He trailed off, but his eyes completed the sentence for him. Beatrice felt a flush creep up her neck. It had been there between them, unspoken but growing stronger each day, this connection, this pull toward each other that defied logic or timing. I'm still married, she said softly, and carrying another man's child. I know. Ruben stood, creating distance between them. I'm not asking for anything, Beatrice. I just want you to know that whatever you decide about your future, you have options. And you have a friend in me, regardless. The word friend felt inadequate for what had developed between them, but it was all they could acknowledge for now. Thank you, she said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. For everything. Ruben nodded, his expression guarded once more. I'll speak to Judge Harmon tomorrow, see what he thinks. No decisions need to be made tonight. After he left, Beatrice sat alone in the gathering darkness, one hand on her belly where her child grew, the other on her heart where something equally new and fragile was taking root. The next morning, Ruben rode into Randsburg earlier than usual. Judge Harmon was an early riser, known to begin his day with coffee at the town's only cafe before walking to the courthouse. Ruben found him there, at his usual table by the window, the morning paper spread before him. Ruben Ironwood, the judge said, looking up with surprise. Twice in 1 month. The town will start rumors you're becoming sociable. Ruben smiled tightly as he took the seat across from the older man. Robert Harmon had been a friend of his father's, one of the few people Ruben trusted implicitly. I need your advice, Judge, privately. The judge folded his newspaper, signaling to the waitress for another cup of coffee. Legal advice or personal? Both, I suspect. Once they were alone, Ruben explained Beatrice's situation, careful to omit any details that might identify her should the wrong ears be listening. Judge Harmon listened without interruption, his bushy eyebrows drawing together as the story unfolded. When Ruben finished, the judge sighed deeply. The law is clear, Ruben. A husband has rights to his wife and children. Courts rarely intervene in domestic matters. He held up a hand as Ruben began to protest. However, there are exceptions, particularly in cases of extreme cruelty. If what you've told me is true, and I have no reason to doubt it is, this woman has grounds for divorce. But that would mean she'd have to face him in court. Not necessarily. The judge leaned forward, lowering his voice. Arizona territory allows for divorce on grounds of cruelty without requiring both parties to be present, provided there's sufficient evidence and proper notice is given to the absent spouse. What kind of evidence? Witness testimony, medical documentation of injuries, that sort of thing. The judge studied Ruben's face. Your doctor friend Willoughby, he examined her when she arrived, yes. Did he document her condition? I believe so. He's meticulous about his records. Good. That's a start. She'd need to provide a sworn statement as well, detailing the abuse. Judge Harmon's expression softened. But Ruben, you need to be certain about this. Getting involved in a matter like this, it could bring trouble to your doorstep. Are you prepared for that? The question wasn't just about Beatrice's husband potentially coming after her. It was about Ruben's own involvement, his growing feelings for a married woman, the complications that would inevitably arise. I'm certain, Ruben said without hesitation. She deserves a chance at a life without fear. The judge nodded slowly. "Very well. I'll draw up the necessary papers, but there's something else you should consider." He paused, choosing his words carefully. Even with a divorce, her husband would still have legal claim to the child. Custody almost always goes to the father unless the mother can prove he's completely unfit. This was a complication Ruben hadn't fully considered. How would she prove that? Same way as the divorce evidence of violence, testimony about his character and habits. But it's harder when it comes to children, especially one not yet born. The judge leaned back in his chair. "There is another option, though it's unconventional. I'm listening. If she were to remarry quickly after the divorce, and her new husband were to adopt the child at birth claiming it as his own, it would be difficult for the first husband to assert his rights later, especially if he's not present at the birth, and his name isn't on the official records." The implication hung in the air between them. Ruben felt his collar tighten. "You're suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything, Ruben, just outlining possibilities." The judge's eyes were shrewd. "Though I will say that in the 30 years I've known you, I've never seen you go to such lengths for someone unless they mattered a great deal to you." Ruben couldn't deny it. In the short time he had known Beatrice, she had come to occupy a space in his heart he had thought permanently closed. Her courage, her gentleness despite all she had endured, her determination to protect her unborn child, all had awakened something in him he had believed long dead. "I'll think about it," he said finally, "and discuss the options with her. It has to be her decision." Judge Harmon nodded. "Wise approach. Bring her to see me when she's ready. We'll handle this as discreetly as possible." As Ruben left the cafe, his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The judge's unconventional option kept circling back, tempting and terrifying in equal measure. Marriage. Not just any marriage, but one entered into for protection rather than passion, complicated by a child not his own, and feelings still too new to be fully trusted. Lost in thought, he almost didn't notice the stranger leaning against the hitching post outside the general store, watching him with narrowed eyes. The man was well-dressed but disheveled, with the look of someone who had been traveling hard for days. There was something in his stance, a coiled tension, a barely contained violence that set Ruben's instincts on edge. Their eyes met briefly before Ruben continued to his horse. He felt the stranger's gaze follow him as he mounted and rode away. It could be nothing, he told himself. Randsburg saw its share of drifters and travelers. But the unease lingered, a shadow at the edge of his consciousness as he rode back to the ranch. Beatrice was in the garden with Mrs. Hernandez when he returned, her hands in the earth as she helped plant late summer vegetables. The side of her cheeks flushed with exertion, hair escaping its pins. A smudge of dirt on her nose hit Ruben with unexpected force. She looked like she belonged there, among the growing things, bringing life from soil just as she carried life within her. She smiled when she saw him, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, something that had been rare when she first arrived but was becoming more common with each passing day. "How was town?" she asked, pushing herself to her feet with some effort. "Productive," he answered, dismounting. "Judge Harmon thinks there might be legal options for your situation. He'd like to meet with you when you're ready." Hope flared in her eyes, quickly tempered by caution. "What kind of options?" "Let's discuss it after supper," he suggested, aware of Mrs. Hernandez's curious presence. "It's complicated and you'll have decisions to make." Beatrice nodded, understanding his reticence. "I'll look forward to it." The rest of the day passed in routine tasks, Ruben checking on the new colt with Beatrice, both smiling as Hope took his first tentative trot around the paddock. A meeting with Frank about rotating the cattle to fresh grazing land. Dinner preparations and the evening meal itself. where conversation flowed easily around subjects that didn't touch on the decisions looming before them. After dinner, Ruben led Beatrice to his study, a room she had not yet entered during her stay. It was distinctly masculine, with leather-bound books lining one wall, a large desk dominated by maps and ledgers, and comfortable chairs arranged before a small fireplace. A silver-framed photograph of his family taken before the war had claimed his brother sat on the desk, alongside a wooden box Beatrice assumed contained personal items. Ruben poured 2 small glasses of sherry, handing one to Beatrice. "Judge Harmon believes you have grounds for divorce on the basis of cruelty," he said without preamble. "It can be done without you having to face Jeremy directly in court, though he would be notified of the proceedings." Beatrice's hand trembled slightly as she sipped her sherry. "Would he know where I am?" "Not necessarily. The notice can be published in the Prescott newspaper, which is standard for cases where one party isn't present. If he doesn't respond within a specified time, the divorce can be granted by default. And if he does respond, if he contests it—" Ruben's expression hardened. "Then we deal with that if it happens. But Judge Harmon is inclined to be sympathetic to your case, especially with Dr. Willoughby's documentation of your injuries when you arrived." Beatrice set down her glass, one hand automatically moving to her belly as the baby kicked. "And the child? What would happen to my baby?" This was the crux of the matter, the question Ruben had been dreading. "That's more complicated. By law, a father has rights to his children even after divorce, especially male children." The color drained from Beatrice's face. "He could take my baby, he could try," Ruben said carefully, "but there are ways to prevent that." He explained what Judge Harmon had suggested: the strategy of remarriage, adoption, creating a legal barrier Jeremy would find difficult to overcome. With each word, he watched Beatrice's expression shift from despair to confusion to cautious hope. But who would? She began, then stopped as understanding dawned. Her eyes widened. "You?" Ruben set down his own glass, kneading his hands free for what he was about to say. "It's one option, yes. But Beatrice, I want to be absolutely clear, this would be your decision entirely. I'm not proposing marriage in the traditional sense. This would be a legal arrangement for protection, nothing more." The lie tasted bitter on his tongue. It wouldn't be nothing more for him, not when his feelings for her grew stronger with each passing day. But he couldn't burden her with that knowledge, not when she was already carrying so much. Beatrice was silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the flames dancing in the fireplace. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Why would you do this? Take on another man's wife, another man's child. People would talk, they would assume. Let them assume. I stopped caring about town gossip long ago." Ruben leaned forward in his chair, willing her to look at him. "As for why, I told you before, you deserve a chance at peace, at safety. Your child deserves to grow up without fear. If I can help provide that, I consider it a privilege, not a burden." "And what do you get from this arrangement?" Her question was direct, her gaze unwavering as it finally met his. What indeed? The chance to wake up each morning to her smile. To watch her belly grow round with child, even if not his own. To be part of a family after years of solitude. All things he couldn't voice aloud. "Companionship," he said instead. "Someone to share this big house with. A child's laughter in rooms that have been quiet too long." He paused, then added honestly, "I'm not a young man anymore, Beatrice. I'm 32, set in my ways. Most women looking for a husband want romance, passion, things I'm not sure I know how to give. But I can offer security, respect, and friendship, if that's enough." "I had romance and passion with Jeremy," Beatrice said softly. "It didn't save me from his fists." She looked down at her hands, folded protectively over her belly. Respect and friendship seem like greater gifts by far. Hope fluttered in Ruben's chest, fragile as a bird's wing. "Then you'll consider it." "I need time to think," she said. "This isn't just about me anymore. Every decision I make affects my child's future." "Of course. Take all the time you need." Ruben stood, signaling that their discussion was concluded for now. "Just know that whatever you decide, you have a place here for as long as you want it, no strings attached." Beatrice rose as well, smoothing her skirts with hands that still trembled slightly. "Thank you, Ruben, for everything." As she turned to leave, Ruben remembered something. There was a stranger in town today. Something about him felt off. Probably nothing, but be careful if you go out riding. Stay close to the house for now. Concern flickered across her face. "You think it could be Jeremy?" "I've never met your husband, so I can't say, just a precaution." He tried to sound reassuring. "Frank and the hands know to keep an eye out for unfamiliar faces." Beatrice nodded, but the worry remained in her eyes as she bid him good night. Ruben watched her go, wondering if he had done the right thing in offering marriage. Was it selfish to want her to stay, knowing his own feelings ran deeper than the friendship he had proposed? Or would it have been more selfish to withhold an option that could secure her future and her child's? Sleep eluded him that night, his mind churning with possibilities, both hopeful and dire. Dawn found him at his desk, reviewing the ranch accounts without really seeing the numbers when a commotion outside drew his attention. One of the ranch hands, young Bobby Williams, was riding hard toward the house, his horse lathered with sweat. Ruben met him on the porch. "Rider coming," Bobby panted. "Stranger. Well-dressed but rough-looking. Asked specific questions about a pregnant woman at the south boundary." Ruben's blood ran cold. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing, boss. Said I was just a hand, didn't know nothing about the comings and goings at the main house. He didn't believe me, though, started getting nasty. Frank sent me to warn you while he and the boys delayed him." "Good work, Bobby." "Get inside. Tell Mrs. Hernandez to keep Beatrice upstairs." Ruben turned, reaching for the rifle he kept mounted beside the door. "And Bobby, if shooting starts, you get the women out the back way to the Martins' place. John will keep them safe until I come." The young cowboy nodded grimly, disappearing into the house. Ruben checked his rifle, then his pistol, before taking up position on the porch. He didn't have to wait long. A single rider appeared on the road leading to the house, moving at a determined trot. Even at a distance, Ruben could see it was the same man he had noticed in town, well-dressed but disheveled, with an air of barely contained violence. Jeremy Barlow had found them. Ruben stood his ground as the rider approached, rifle held casually but ready. The man reined in his horse about 20 feet from the porch, his cold eyes taking in Ruben's stance, the weapon in his hands, the quiet determination in his face. "I'm looking for my wife," Jeremy Barlow said without preamble. "Beatrice Barlow. I have reason to believe she's here." "No one by that name here," Ruben replied evenly. "Just me, my housekeeper, and my hands." Jeremy's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Funny, because I described her to some folks in town, pretty thing, about 5.5 months gone with child, and they seem to think she matched the woman seen riding with you just yesterday." Ruben cursed inwardly. Randsburg was small, and newcomers were always noticed, especially one in Beatrice's condition. "Town gossip, not reliable. I think it is." Jeremy's hand moved to rest on his own pistol. "I want to see my wife, now, and I told you there's no Beatrice Barlow here. Now I suggest you turn around and head back to where you came from." Ruben's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "Whatever you're looking for, you won't find it here." Jeremy's face contorted with rage. "She's mine," he spat. "Her and the baby both. No one takes what belongs to me." "No one belongs to you," Ruben said quietly. "Not your wife, not your child, not anymore." For a tense moment, they stared at each other, two men with fundamentally different views of the world and a woman's place in it. Then Jeremy's hand moved, faster than Ruben had anticipated, drawing his pistol. A shot rang out, but it wasn't from Jeremy's gun. Frank Carter stood at the corner of the house, his smoking rifle trained on Jeremy, who now clutched his right arm, blood seeping between his fingers. "Next one won't be a warning," Frank said calmly. "Drop the gun." Jeremy's face was a mask of pain and fury as his pistol fell to the dirt. "This isn't over," he snarled at Ruben. "She's my wife under the law. That child is mine by blood. No court in this territory will say different." "Maybe not," Ruben conceded, descending the porch steps to retrieve Jeremy's fallen weapon. "But no court will fault me for defending my property against an armed trespasser, either. Now get off my land before my foreman decides his trigger finger is itchy again." Defeat and hatred warred in Jeremy's eyes as he gathered his reins one-handed. "Tell Beatrice I'll be waiting in town. When she comes to her senses, she knows where to find me." "I'll pass along the message," Ruben said, though they both knew he had no intention of doing so. With one last venomous glare, Jeremy wheeled his horse and rode away, his wounded arm clutched against his chest. Ruben watched until he was out of sight, then turned to Frank. "Good shot." Frank shrugged. "Would have been better between the eyes, but you're too law-abiding for that." "He'll be back," Ruben said, staring down the empty road. "Probably. But next time we'll be ready." Frank shouldered his rifle. "What about Mrs. Barlow? She's staying." Before Ruben could answer, a soft voice behind him said, "Yes, I'm staying." Beatrice stood on the porch, her face pale but composed, one hand resting protectively on her belly. She must have heard at least part of the confrontation from an upstairs window. "Beatrice, you shouldn't be out here," Ruben began, but she shook her head. "I'm tired of hiding, Ruben. Tired of running." Her eyes, when they met his, were clear and determined. "I've made my decision. If your offer still stands, I'd like to accept it." Understanding dawned on Frank's weathered face as he looked between them. "Well now," he said, a rare smile creasing his features. "Seems congratulations might be in order." "Frank," Ruben said, not taking his eyes off Beatrice. "Would you give us a moment?" The foreman nodded, tactfully retreating toward the bunkhouse where the other hands were watching with undisguised curiosity. When they were alone, Ruben climbed the steps to stand before Beatrice. "Are you sure? This isn't how I wanted you to decide, forced by fear or desperation." "I'm not being forced by anything except the truth I've been avoiding," she said softly. "The truth that I feel safe here with you. That my child deserves a father who will protect rather than harm. That she hesitated, a flush coloring her cheeks, that I've come to care for you, Ruben Ironwood, in ways I never expected to care for anyone again." Her words pierced something in Ruben's chest, a wall he had built around his heart years ago that now crumbled like sand. Before he could think better of it, he reached for her hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture both old-fashioned and deeply felt. "Then yes, Beatrice Barlow, my offer stands. I would be honored to make you my wife and your child my own." The smile that illuminated her face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, radiant, life-giving, full of promise. "Then it's settled," she said. "When do we begin?" The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Judge Harmon, true to his word, expedited the divorce proceedings, filing the necessary papers and publishing the notice in the Prescott newspaper. Dr. Willoughby provided his medical documentation, and Beatrice gave her sworn testimony of Jeremy's cruelty, a process that left her emotionally drained but resolute. Jeremy remained in town, taking a room at the hotel and making his presence known at the saloon. where he spread his own version of events, that his pregnant wife had been seduced away by a wealthy rancher, that he was the wronged party in this sordid affair. Some believed him, particularly those who had always found Ruben too reserved, too different. Others, who had seen Jeremy's volatile temper firsthand during his brief stay, were more skeptical through it all. Ruben kept Beatrice close to the ranch, not wanting to risk another confrontation. Frank and the hands formed a protective circle around the property, always alert for signs of trouble. Mrs. Hernandez, once she understood what was happening, became Beatrice's fiercest advocate, fussing over her like a mother hen and glaring daggers at anyone who dared to whisper in her presence during their infrequent trips to town. The divorce was granted with surprising swiftness, Judge Harmon citing the clear and compelling evidence of extreme cruelty and the delicate condition of the petitioner as reasons for his expedited decision. Jeremy, despite his threats, did not appear in court to contest it. Ruben suspected this was less about acceptance and more about strategy. Jeremy was biding his time, waiting until the child was born to press his claims. The day after the divorce was finalized, Ruben and Beatrice stood before Judge Harmon in his chambers, exchanging simple vows that belied the complexity of their situation. Beatrice wore a new dress of soft blue muslin that Mrs. Hernandez had helped her make, with a white lace collar that framed her face. Ruben, in his best suit, found himself almost unable to speak past the lump in his throat when it came time to say, "I do." Frank stood as witness, his usually impassive face softened by genuine happiness for his friend. When Judge Harmon pronounced them husband and wife, Ruben hesitated only briefly before leaning down to place a gentle kiss on Beatrice's lips there first, a seal on promises made and a future uncertain but faced together. The wedding supper at the ranch was a simple affair, attended by the judge, Dr. Willoughby, Frank and the hands, and a few trusted neighbors who had been quietly supportive during the tumultuous weeks. Mrs. Hernandez outdid herself with a feast that included a small cake decorated with late summer flowers. As darkness fell and the guests departed, Ruben found himself suddenly awkward, unsure of the boundaries in this marriage begun under such unusual circumstances. Beatrice, however, seemed to read his thoughts. "I know this isn't a conventional marriage," she said as they stood alone on the porch, watching the last of the guests ride away. "That there are expectations that might not apply to us." Ruben turned to her, struck anew by her beauty in the soft glow of the lantern light. "Beatrice, I meant what I said before. This arrangement is for your protection and the child's. I don't expect anything from you that you're not ready or willing to give." She stepped closer, her hand finding his in the darkness. "And if I am willing, if I find that my feelings for you have grown beyond friendship or gratitude," the question hung between them, charged with possibility. Ruben's heart hammered against his ribs as he gazed down at her upturned face, seeing in her eyes a reflection of his own longing. "Then we would take things slowly," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Day by day finding our way together." Beatrice's smile was soft, a little shy. "I would like that, Ruben. Very much." He leaned down, drawn by a force as inexorable as gravity, and kissed her again, not the brief, ceremonial kiss of their wedding, but something deeper, a promise of things to come when they were both ready. When he pulled back, the wonder in her eyes mirrored his own. "Come," he said, offering her his arm. "It's been a long day, you need your rest." That night they slept in separate rooms as they had before, Beatrice in the guest room that had become hers, Ruben in the master bedroom down the hall. But something had shifted between them. A door opened that could not be closed again. The weeks that followed saw a gentle evolution of their relationship. Small touches became more frequent, Ruben's hand at the small of her back as they walked, Beatrice's fingers lingering on his arm when he helped her down from the buggy. Their evenings on the porch extended later into the night, conversations flowing more freely, laughter coming more easily. Physical intimacy developed gradually, respectful of Beatrice's advancing pregnancy and the emotional scars she still carried from her first marriage. The first time Ruben spent the night in her room, it was simply to hold her through a thunderstorm that had triggered memories of nights cowering from Jeremy's rage. They lay atop the covers, fully clothed, his arms a protective circle around her until she fell asleep. October brought cooler temperatures, and a letter from Beatrice's parents, their response to the news of her divorce and remarriage, which she had finally felt strong enough to share. Their relief at knowing she was safe warred with concern over the speed of events, but they promised to visit once the baby was born, eager to meet their grandchild and the man who had given their daughter a new start. "They'll love you," Beatrice assured Ruben as she read the letter aloud. "Especially my father. He always wanted a son who shared his love of the land." "I look forward to meeting them," Ruben said, meaning it. The thought of family, of connections beyond the solitary existence he had maintained for so long, was no longer frightening but welcome. As Beatrice's pregnancy advanced into its final months, Ruben found himself increasingly fascinated by the changes in her body, the way she bloomed with new life. He would watch in wonder as she guided his hand to feel the baby's movements, a foot or elbow pressing against her skin, a tangible reminder of the child that would soon join their unconventional family. "You think it's a boy or a girl?" he asked one evening as they sat before the fire, Beatrice's head resting against his shoulder, his hand spread protectively over her belly. "A boy, I think," she said, smiling as a particularly strong kick punctuated her words. "He's too active to be anything else." "Girls can be spirited too," Ruben countered, thinking of his sister Margaret, who had climbed trees and ridden bareback with the best of them. "True." Beatrice turned her face up to his. "Would you prefer one over the other?" The question gave him pause. A year ago, he wouldn't have imagined himself discussing children, let alone preparing to raise one not of his blood. Now the prospect filled him with equal parts terror and joy. "Healthy," he said finally. "That's all that matters, healthy and happy and loved." The sincerity in his voice brought tears to Beatrice's eyes. "You're going to be a wonderful father, Ruben Ironwood." He kissed her then, marveling at how natural it felt now, this tenderness between them that had grown from the most unlikely soil. November brought the first dusting of snow to the mountains and increasing discomfort for Beatrice as she entered her final month of pregnancy. Dr. Willoughby visited weekly now, assuring them that everything was progressing normally but advising Beatrice to rest more as her due date approached. Despite the doctor's orders, Beatrice insisted on helping prepare for the baby's arrival, working alongside Mrs. Hernandez to transform a small room adjacent to the master bedroom into a nursery. Ruben commissioned a cradle from the town's carpenter, made of sturdy oak that would last for generations. Frank and the hands pitched in, building a rocking chair for the nursery and presenting it to Beatrice with shy pride. The sense of anticipation that filled the ranch was almost palpable. Even the hands, rough men more accustomed to cattle than babies, found excuses to pass by the house, offering awkward congratulations or bringing small gifts: a hand-carved wooden horse, a tiny pair of moccasins purchased from a passing Native American trader. Ruben found himself touched by their acceptance, their unquestioning inclusion of Beatrice and her unborn child into the ranch family. It was a reminder that family could be formed in many ways, not just through blood. The only shadow on their happiness was the continued presence of Jeremy Barlow in Randsburg. Though he had made no further attempts to approach the ranch, reports from town suggested he was still nursing his grievance, still waiting for an opportunity to reclaim what he considered his property. "He won't give up," Beatrice said one night, her voice tight with anxiety. "Not until he gets what he wants." Ruben pulled her closer, his hand automatically moving to shield her belly. "Then he'll be waiting a long time, because I'm not giving up either." The confrontation they had both been dreading came sooner than expected. In early December, with Beatrice just days from her due date, Ruben was forced to go to Randsburg on urgent business. The bank was foreclosing on a neighboring ranch, and the owner, an elderly widow, had asked for Ruben's help in negotiating an extension. "I'll be back before nightfall," he promised Beatrice, reluctant to leave her even for a few hours. "Frank will stay close to the house, and Mrs. Hernandez won't leave your side." "I'll be fine," Beatrice assured him, though her eyes betrayed her nervousness. "The baby's not due for another week, and first babies often come late," Dr. Willoughby said. With a final kiss, Ruben departed, riding into town with a sense of foreboding he couldn't shake. The meeting at the bank took longer than expected, the banker being particularly obstinate, but Ruben eventually secured a 6-month extension for Mrs. Peterson, giving her time to sell some of her stock and settle her affairs. It was late afternoon when he emerged from the bank, the winter sun already sinking toward the horizon. He was headed for his horse when a voice called his name. Jeremy Barlow, standing in the doorway of the saloon across the street. "Ironwood, a word with you." Ruben's hand instinctively moved to his gun, but he kept it there, not drawing in the middle of town. "I have nothing to say to you, Barlow." Jeremy stepped into the street, swaying slightly. Drunk, Ruben realized, which made him unpredictable but might also slow his reflexes. "You stole my wife." "My child. You think I'll just let that stand?" People on the boardwalk stopped to watch, the tension palpable. Sheriff Davis emerged from his office further down the street, alerted by the commotion. "Beatrice made her own choice," Ruben said evenly, "and the courts supported it." "It's over, Barlow. Go home." "It's not over until I say it's over." Jeremy's hand moved to his gun, but before he could draw, Sheriff Davis's voice rang out. "That's enough, Barlow. Stand down or spend the night in my jail." Jeremy hesitated, his hand hovering over his holster, his eyes never leaving Ruben's face. "This isn't finished," he said finally, his voice slurred but venomous. "You'll see. That baby is mine, and I'll have it one way or another." With a final glare, he turned and staggered back into the saloon. The onlookers began to disperse, the excitement over for now, but Ruben stood frozen, Jeremy's threat echoing in his ears. Sheriff Davis approached, his expression grim. "You ought to be careful, Ironwood. Man like that with liquor in him and a grudge to nurse, he's dangerous." "I know." Ruben mounted his horse, his need to get home to Beatrice suddenly urgent. "Keep an eye on him if you can, Sheriff. I don't think he's done causing trouble." The ride back to the ranch seemed interminable, the winter twilight closing in around him as he pushed his horse to a gallop. Relief flooded him when the lights of the ranch house finally came into view, warm and welcoming in the gathering darkness. But his relief was short-lived. As he approached, he saw Frank and two of the hands standing on the porch, their postures tense, rifles at the ready. Frank hurried down the steps as Ruben dismounted. "What is it?" Ruben demanded, his heart in his throat. "Beatrice, she's fine," Frank assured him quickly. "But her time's come early. Doc Willoughby's with her now and Mrs. Hernandez. Baby's in a hurry, seems like." Ruben brushed past him, taking the porch steps 2 at a time. Inside, He could hear sounds from upstairs, Beatrice's voice, strained but determined, Mrs. Hernandez's soothing murmurs, Dr. Willoughby's calm instructions. He took the stairs 3 at a time, but paused outside the bedroom door, suddenly uncertain. This was women's business traditionally, the birthing room no place for men. But this wasn't a traditional situation, and Beatrice wasn't just any woman, she was his wife, carrying a child he had promised to love as his own. Before he could decide, the door opened, and Mrs. Hernandez peered out. "Ah, Senor Ironwood, you are back. Good, she has been asking for you. Can I?" Ruben gestured awkwardly toward the room. Mrs. Hernandez's expression softened. "Of course, she needs you now." The scene that greeted him was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Beatrice lay in their bed, her hair damp with sweat, her face flushed with effort. "Doctor." Willoughby stood at the foot of the bed, sleeves rolled up, his manner calm but focused. "Ruben." Beatrice reached for him, relief flooding her features. "You're here." He was at her side in an instant, taking her outstretched hand, brushing damp hair from her forehead. "Of course I'm here." "Where else would I be?" she smiled, then grimaced as another contraction seized her. Her hand tightened on his with surprising strength as she worked through the pain. "You're doing wonderfully, Mrs. Ironwood," Dr. Willoughby said when the contraction passed. "Not much longer now. The baby's head is crowning." Ruben stayed by Beatrice's side as she labored, offering what comfort he could, a cool cloth for her brow, words of encouragement, his hand to grip when the pain was at its worst. He marveled at her strength, her determination, her fierce focus on bringing this new life safely into the world. And then, with a final triumphant effort from Beatrice, the baby slipped into Dr. Willoughby's waiting hands, and a lusty cry filled the room, indignant at being thrust from warm darkness into cold light. "A boy," the doctor announced, quickly wiping the infant clean and placing him on Beatrice's chest. "A fine, healthy son." Beatrice's tears flowed freely as she cradled her newborn, her fingers gently exploring his face, his tiny hands, the downy hair on his head. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Ruben stood speechless, overwhelmed by the scene before him, his wife, exhausted but radiant. The baby, red-faced and squalling, perfect in every detail. A family, his family, formed not by blood but by choice and circumstance, and a love that had grown steadily, surprisingly, over the months they had known each other. "Ruben," Beatrice's voice drew him back to the moment. "Would you like to hold your son, your son?" The words hit him with unexpected force. This child, born of another man's blood but entrusted to his care, his protection, his love. Without hesitation, he reached for the swaddled infant, cradling him awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence as the baby quieted in his arms. "Hello, son," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Welcome to the world." The baby's eyes, unfocused and dark blue like all newborns, seemed to study his face. One tiny hand escaped the swaddling, fingers flexing as if reaching out. Instinctively, Ruben offered his finger, feeling a surge of protective love when the infant's hand closed around it with surprising strength. "What shall we name him?" Beatrice asked, watching them with tired contentment. They had discussed names, of course, but had never quite settled on one. Now, holding this new life in his arms, Ruben thought of hope and second chances, of journeys ended and begun. "Matthew," he suggested. "It means gift from God." Beatrice's smile was luminous. "Matthew Ironwood, it's perfect." Dr. Willoughby cleared his throat discreetly. "I need to complete a few things with Mrs. Ironwood now," he said. "And then they both should rest." Ruben reluctantly handed Matthew back to Beatrice, leaning down to press a kiss to her forehead. "I'll be right outside," he promised. "You were amazing." In the hallway, he leaned against the wall, emotions washing over him in waves: joy, wonder, fear, fierce protectiveness. He had thought himself prepared for this moment, had believed he understood what it would mean to take on another man's child. But the reality of it, the tiny weight in his arms, the absolute trust in those unfocused eyes, was more overwhelming than he could have imagined. And then there was the threat still looming: Jeremy Barlow, determined to claim what he saw as his property, more dangerous now than ever. The confrontation in town earlier that day took on new urgency in light of Matthew's birth. Ruben had no illusions that Jeremy would simply give up and move on, not when his pride was so deeply wounded. Mrs. Hernandez emerged from the bedroom carrying linens to be washed, her face wreathed in smiles. "A beautiful boy," she said. "Strong lungs, good color. You will be kept awake many nights, I think." Ruben smiled despite his concerns. "I look forward to every one of them." When Dr. Willoughby finally emerged, his expression was satisfied. "Mother and child are doing excellently," he reported. "Mrs. Ironwood is resting now. The baby has nursed well, which is always a good sign." "Thank you, Doc, for everything." The older man clasped Ruben's shoulder. "It's been my pleasure to be part of this, Ruben. Not every story has such a happy chapter after a difficult beginning." His expression turned serious. "I've filled out the birth certificate with the information Mrs. Ironwood provided, listed you as the father, as agreed. It will be filed with the county clerk tomorrow." Ruben nodded, grateful for the doctor's discretion and support. "One more thing, Doc. Barlow was in town today making threats. If he comes asking about the baby." "As far as I'm concerned, Matthew Ironwood was born to Ruben and Beatrice Ironwood, a healthy, full-term baby boy. Doctor-patient confidentiality prevents me from discussing any other details." Dr. Willoughby's usually kind eyes hardened. "I've seen what happens to children raised by men like Barlow. I won't be party to placing a child in harm's way." After the doctor left, Ruben looked in on Beatrice and Matthew. Both were sleeping peacefully, the baby nestled against his mother's side, one tiny hand flung out as if reaching for something in his dreams. The sight filled Ruben with a protective love so fierce it almost frightened him. Moving quietly so as not to disturb them, he went downstairs where Frank was waiting for a report. "A boy," Ruben said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. "Healthy and strong." Frank's weathered face split in a rare, wide smile. "Congratulations, boss. This calls for a celebration." He produced a bottle of fine whiskey that had been saved for special occasions. To young Matthew Ironwood and his fortunate parents, they drank a toast, then Frank's expression sobered. "What about Barlow? He's still in town, still making noise about his rights." "I know. Had a run-in with him today." Ruben swirled the whiskey in his glass, watching the amber liquid catch the lamplight. "He won't give up easily." "So we don't make it easy for him," Frank said simply. "The men and I will take shifts watching the approaches to the ranch. No one gets within a mile of the house without us knowing." Ruben nodded, grateful once again for the loyalty of his foreman and the men who worked for him. "Just for a while, until we see what Barlow's next move is." But Jeremy's next move came sooner and more decisively than any of them had anticipated. Shortly after midnight, with the ranch house quiet and the first snow of winter beginning to fall, one of the hands on watch duty spotted a solitary rider approaching from the south, not along the main road, but cutting across open country, keeping to shadows where possible. The alarm was raised quietly, men moving to predetermined positions, rifles at the ready. Ruben, who had been dozing in a chair beside Beatrice's bed, was alerted by a soft knock at the bedroom door. "Rider coming," Frank whispered when Ruben opened it. "Looks like Barlow." Ruben glanced back at Beatrice and Matthew, still sleeping peacefully. "Keep everyone in position, but no shooting unless absolutely necessary. I'll handle this." He moved silently downstairs, checking his pistol before stepping onto the darkened porch. The night was cold and still, the falling snow muffling sounds, creating a world of soft edges and whispers. From the shadows at the edge of the property, a figure emerged: Jeremy Barlow, leading his horse by the reins, moving with the exaggerated care of a man trying to be stealthy despite being intoxicated. Ruben waited until Jeremy was halfway to the house before speaking. "That's far enough, Barlow." Jeremy froze, peering through the darkness toward the porch. "Ironwood, I figured you'd be up." His words were slurred, his breath visible in the cold air. "I've come for what's mine. Nothing here belongs to you." Ruben's voice was calm, controlled, though his heart raced with anger and fear. "The courts have spoken. Beatrice is no longer your wife, and her child is not legally yours." "The courts don't know everything," Jeremy spat. "That's my blood, my heir. You think I'll let another man raise my son?" He took a step forward, his hand moving to his coat pocket. "I have rights." "You had responsibilities first," Ruben countered, "which you abandoned when you raised your hand to your wife. You forfeited any rights to that child the first time you struck its mother." Jeremy's laugh was bitter, edged with madness. High and mighty Ruben Ironwood, the honorable rancher, taking in a pregnant woman out of the goodness of his heart. His voice dripped with sarcasm. "We both know what you're really after. Well, you can have her used goods that she is, but the boy is mine." Ruben's hand tightened on his gun, rage building in his chest at Jeremy's words. "The boy is Matthew Ironwood, my son in every way that matters. And Beatrice is my wife, who deserves far better than the likes of you ever gave her." Pretty words. Jeremy's hand emerged from his pocket, holding not a gun but a folded document. "But I have this: a writ from a judge in Prescott, acknowledging my paternity and granting me visitation rights. Your precious Judge Harmon isn't the only one with legal authority." Ruben's blood ran cold. He hadn't considered this possibility, that Jeremy would seek legal means to maintain a connection to the child. A foothold that could be leveraged later. "Any judge worth his salt would revoke those rights if he knew the kind of man you are," Ruben said, stalling for time as he considered his options. "Maybe, but proving that could take months, years even." Jeremy took another step forward, swaying slightly. "In the meantime, I have the right to see my son. I can make your lives a living hell, showing up whenever I please, reminding the boy who his real father is." The cruelty of this strategy was breathtaking. Jeremy might have lost Beatrice, but he was determined to maintain his hold over her through the child, to poison Matthew's life with his presence, to ensure that Beatrice would never truly be free of him. "That paper means nothing here," Ruben said, his decision made. "This is my land, my home, my family. You're not welcome now or ever." Jeremy's face contorted with rage. "You can't keep me from my son. Watch me." Ruben raised his pistol, aiming not at Jeremy but at the document in his hand. Before Jeremy could react, Ruben fired, the shot echoing in the still night air as the bullet tore through the paper, narrowly missing Jeremy's fingers. Jeremy stumbled backward, shock and fear replacing the arrogance on his face. From the shadows around the property, men emerged, rifles trained on the intruder Frank in the hands, positioned to protect the house and its occupants. "You're outnumbered, Barlow," Frank called, "and the boss's aim gets better with the second shot." For a moment, it seemed Jeremy might press forward despite the odds, such was the madness in his eyes. Then, slowly, he lowered his hand, letting the shredded remains of the document fall to the snow. "This isn't over," he said, his voice thick with hatred. "You'll see. No one takes what's mine. Everything that was once yours has made a choice, Ruben replied steadily. Respect it, or the next time I won't aim for the paper. The threat hung in the air between them, clear and unambiguous. Jeremy held Ruben's gaze for a long moment, then turned abruptly, mounting his horse with clumsy haste. Without another word, he wheeled the animal around and galloped away, disappearing into the snowy night. Ruben watched until he was out of sight, then lowered his gun, his hand trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. Frank approached, his expression grim. "Think he'll be back?" "Not tonight," Ruben said. "But eventually, yes. A man like that doesn't give up easily. Then we'll be ready." Frank nodded toward the house. "You should get back to your family. We'll keep watch in case he changes his mind." Family. The word filled Ruben with warmth despite the cold night and the confrontation just ended. He had a family now: Beatrice, Matthew, the people who had gathered around them in support and protection. It was worth fighting for, worth any risk. When he returned to the bedroom, he found Beatrice awake, Matthew nursing contentedly at her breast. She looked up as he entered, her expression questioning. "I heard a shot," she said softly. "Was it?" Ruben nodded, taking a seat beside her on the bed. "He came for Matthew, had some kind of court order from a judge in Prescott, claiming visitation rights." Fear flashed in Beatrice's eyes. "Can he do that? The paper doesn't exist anymore," Ruben said grimly. "And if he tries again, we'll fight it. Judge Harmon has friends in higher courts. We have documentation of Jeremy's cruelty, witnesses to his threats. No reasonable judge would grant him access to a child under these circumstances." Beatrice looked down at Matthew, now drowsy with milk, his tiny face peaceful. "Will we ever truly be free of him, Ruben? Will Matthew?" The question pierced Ruben's heart. He wished he could promise her that Jeremy would disappear from their lives forever, that Matthew would grow up without the shadow of his biological father's claims. But he wouldn't lie to her, not even to ease her fears. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I do know this. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Matthew will grow up surrounded by love and protection. He'll know who his true father is, not by blood, but by choice." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of gratitude, not fear. "I never thought I could be this blessed," she whispered. "To find you, to have this chance at happiness despite everything." Ruben leaned forward, pressing a gentle kiss to her lips, then to the downy head of their son. "The blessing is mine," he said softly. "You and Matthew, you've given me a family when I thought I would always be alone." As if understanding the significance of the moment, Matthew opened his eyes, regarding them both with the unfocused gaze of the newly born. One tiny hand reached out, fingers splayed, and Ruben offered his finger just as he had earlier. The baby grasped it firmly, a connection physical and symbolic. "He knows," Beatrice said, wonder in her voice. "He knows you're his father." Ruben felt something shift inside him, a final piece falling into place. This child might not carry his blood, but in every way that mattered, Matthew was his son. He would protect him, guide him, love him without reservation or condition. Not because of duty or obligation, but because his heart had already claimed this tiny being as his own. "Yes," he agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "And I will make sure he never forgets it." The days that followed were filled with the gentle chaos of new parenthood midnight feedings, diaper changes, the endless wonder of discovering each new expression on Matthew's face. Ruben threw himself into fatherhood with the same dedication he had always shown to his ranch, learning alongside Beatrice the rhythms and needs of their son. Jeremy did not return to the ranch, though reports from town suggested he remained in Randsburg, drinking heavily and alternating between threats of legal action and maudlin self-pity. Sheriff Davis kept a close eye on him, warning Ruben when Jeremy's mood seemed particularly volatile. Christmas came, bringing with it a light dusting of snow and a sense of celebration that extended beyond the holiday itself. Margaret arrived from San Francisco with her husband and children, eager to meet her new sister-in-law and nephew. The house filled with laughter, music, and the rich sense of holiday cooking as Mrs. Hernandez and Beatrice collaborated on festive meals. Watching his sister's children dote on baby Matthew, seeing the easy friendship that developed between Margaret and Beatrice, Ruben felt a contentment he had not experienced since before the war. The ranch house, once so empty despite its size, now pulsed with life and love. On Christmas Eve, after the children had been put to bed with visions of Santa Claus dancing in their heads, the adults gathered in the sitting room before the fire. Margaret's husband, David, played the piano while Margaret sang carols in her clear soprano. Beatrice sat beside Ruben on the sofa, Matthew sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I have something for you," Ruben said quietly, reaching into his pocket. "It's not much, but—" He handed her a small box wrapped in silver paper. Beatrice looked surprised they had agreed not to exchange gifts, focusing instead on Matthew's first Christmas, but accepted it with a smile. Carefully balancing the baby, she unwrapped the package to reveal a velvet jeweler's box. Inside nestled a gold locket, simple but elegant. "Open it," Ruben urged. Beatrice did, and tears immediately filled her eyes. Inside the locket was a miniature portrait of the three of them, Ruben, Beatrice, and Matthew, painted by an artist in town from a photograph taken when Matthew was just 3 days old. "It's beautiful," she whispered, touching the tiny image with gentle fingertips. Our family," Ruben agreed, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Now and always." Margaret, observing from across the room, smiled knowingly. She had seen the change in her brother since meeting Beatrice, the softening of his expressions, the light in his eyes that had been absent for so many years. Whatever unusual circumstances had brought them together, there was no doubting the love that had grown between them. As midnight approached, Margaret and David excused themselves to check on their children, leaving Ruben and Beatrice alone before the dying fire. Matthew had been put to bed in his cradle, leaving Beatrice free to lean more fully into Ruben's embrace. "This has been the happiest Christmas I can remember," she confessed, her head resting against his shoulder. "Even as a child, holidays were often strained, my parents worrying about money, my father drinking too much to escape those worries." Ruben stroked her hair, now grown out enough to curl softly around her face. "Every Christmas from now on will be happy," he promised. "I'll make sure of it." Beatrice tilted her face up to his, her eyes reflecting the glow of the embers. "You've given me so much, Ruben. Security, protection, a name for my child. But most of all, you've given me back my ability to trust, to believe in goodness again." The sincerity in her voice touched something deep in Ruben's soul. "You've given me more," he said softly. "A reason to come home each night, joy in simple moments. A future that holds more than just work and duty." He paused, gathering courage for words he had held back until now. "You've given me love, Beatrice, something I thought I might never experience." The word hung between them, honest and vulnerable. They had been married nearly a month, had shared a home for much longer, had brought a child into the world together, but neither had spoken the word aloud until now, as if saying it might somehow break the fragile happiness they had built. Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. "I do love you, Ruben Ironwood, with all my heart." He kissed her then, pouring into the gesture all the emotion he found difficult to express in words: his love, his gratitude, his promise to cherish her always. When they finally parted, Breathless and flushed, the clock on the mantel was striking midnight. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Ironwood," Ruben whispered against her lips. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Ironwood," she replied, her arms twining around his neck to draw him down for another kiss. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the land in pristine white, a blank page on which to write new stories, new beginnings. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms before the dying fire, Ruben and Beatrice celebrated their first Christmas as a family formed not by convention or blood, but by choice and courage and love that had overcome the shadows of the past. Spring came to Ironwood Ranch in a riot of wildflowers and new beginnings. Matthew, now 4 months old, thrived under the devoted care of his parents and the extended family of ranch hands and neighbors who had welcomed him so warmly. He was a happy baby, quick to smile, with eyes that had settled into the same sage green as his mother's and a dusting of dark hair that hinted at reddish highlights in certain light. Beatrice had blossomed as well, regaining her strength after the birth and taking to motherhood with natural grace. She had also embraced her role as mistress of Ironwood Ranch, working alongside Ruben to improve operations, suggesting innovations that her practical farm girl's upbringing made feasible. Under her influence, the ranch expanded its vegetable gardens, added chickens and dairy cows, and began to diversify beyond cattle. Ruben watched these changes with pride and wonder, amazed at how thoroughly Beatrice had transformed not just his home but his life. Their marriage, begun as a practical arrangement, had deepened into something neither had dared to hope for: a true partnership of hearts and minds, built on mutual respect and growing love. As for Jeremy Barlow, he had finally left Randsburg in early February, his funds exhausted, his welcome in town worn thin. Sheriff Davis reported that he had boarded a train east, claiming he was headed for St. Louis where he had family. Whether he would return someday remained an unspoken worry. But as weeks passed with no word, the shadow he cast over their happiness gradually receded. One bright April morning, Beatrice sat on a blanket spread beneath an oak tree in the ranch yard, watching as Ruben introduced Matthew to Hope, the colt born the day before Beatrice had arrived at the ranch. Now nearly a yearling, Hope was gentle and curious, snuffling at the baby's outstretched hand while Ruben supported Matthew safely in his arms. The sight filled Beatrice with such overwhelming love that tears sprang to her eyes. This man, who had taken in a desperate stranger, who had married her to protect her child, who had faced down threats without hesitation, he was now teaching their son to love the land and its creatures with the same gentle reverence he himself possessed. Our son, she corrected herself. For Matthew was truly Ruben's son now, in all the ways that mattered. The legal adoption had been finalized in March, Judge Harmon presiding with a satisfied smile, as he signed the documents that made official what their hearts had already recognized, that Matthew Daniel Ironwood was the son of Ruben and Beatrice Ironwood, with all the rights and protections that entailed. As if sensing her thoughts, Ruben looked up, his face breaking into the smile that still made her heart skip a beat. He whispered something to Matthew, then approached the blanket, carefully lowering himself to sit beside her with the baby cradled in his lap. "What were you thinking just now?" he asked, noting the traces of tears on her cheeks. "You looked 1,000 miles away." "Not away," Beatrice corrected, reaching out to stroke Matthew's downy head. "Right here counting my blessings." Ruben's free hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of true partners. "I've been doing some counting of my own," he said, his voice taking on a note of seriousness. "Thinking about the future, about what we're building here." Something in his tone caught Beatrice's attention, What do you mean? Ruben looked down at Matthew, who had fallen asleep against his chest, one tiny fist clutching his father's shirt. I was thinking that perhaps Matthew shouldn't grow up an only child. That this ranch is big enough for more little Ironwoods to run around. Beatrice's breath caught in her throat. They had not discussed having more children, though the possibility had hovered unspoken between them as their marriage deepened from arrangement to true union. "Are you saying you want another baby?" she asked softly. Ruben's eyes, when they met hers, were filled with love and hope. "I'm saying I want whatever future you want, Beatrice. But yes, if you're asking my preference, I would love to see our family grow. To have children who carry both our blood, brothers and sisters for Matthew, who will never know him as anything but their equal." The thought filled Beatrice with unexpected longing. Matthew was a miracle, a gift she would never take for granted. But the idea of carrying Ruben's child, of creating new life from their love, it stirred something deep within her. "I would like that," she admitted, a blush coloring her cheeks. "Very much." Ruben's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He leaned forward, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby, and kissed her with a tenderness that still had the power to make her heart race. "Then we have something new to look forward to," he said when they parted. "Another chapter in our story." Beatrice nodded, her heart too full for words. Their story, which had begun with her desperate flight and his unexpected kindness, had already taken turns neither could have predicted. Who knew what the future might hold? As if in answer to this unspoken question, the sound of an approaching wagon drew their attention. Frank appeared around the side of the house, leading a rig driven by an older couple Beatrice didn't recognize. The woman, gray-haired but still handsome, was peering anxiously toward them, while the man, tall and weathered by years of outdoor labor, sat straight-backed beside her. "Beatrice," Ruben said softly, recognition dawning in his eyes. "I think your parents have arrived." Beatrice gasped, scrambling to her feet. She had written to her parents after Matthew's birth, inviting them to visit when spring made travel easier, but had received no reply. She had begun to fear that they disapproved of her choices, that the bridge to her past had been irreparably burned. Yet here they were, Benjamin and Hannah Barlow, looking older and more careworn than when she had left home, but undeniably present, real, reaching out across the distance her choices had created. "Mama, Papa." Her voice broke as she moved toward the wagon, Ruben following with Matthew still sleeping in his arms. Hannah Barlow was the first to react, practically falling from the wagon in her haste to reach her daughter. "Beatrice, oh my girl, my baby girl." She enveloped Beatrice in a fierce embrace that smelled of lilac water and home. "We've been so worried." Benjamin Barlow descended more slowly, his eyes moving from his daughter to the tall man standing behind her, and finally to the small bundle in his arms. "Is that?" he began, his voice gruff with emotion. "Your grandson," Beatrice confirmed, wiping tears from her cheeks. "Matthew, and this is my husband, Ruben Ironwood." The moment stretched, taut with unspoken questions and old hurts. Then Benjamin stepped forward, extending his hand to Ruben. "Mr. Ironwood, seems we have a lot to thank you for." Ruben shifted Matthew carefully to one arm, accepting the older man's handshake with quiet dignity. "The gratitude is mine, sir. Your daughter has brought more happiness to this ranch than it's ever known." Something in Ruben's sincere tone seemed to satisfy Benjamin. He nodded once, then turned his attention to the baby. "May I?" Ruben transferred Matthew gently to his grandfather's arms, watching as the gruff exterior melted away in the presence of new life. Hannah crowded close, cooing over the baby's features, exclaiming over his resemblance to Beatrice as an infant. "Why don't we go inside?" Beatrice suggested, her heart overflowing with joy at this unexpected reunion. "Mrs. Hernandez has lemonade ready, and you must be tired from your journey." As they walked toward the house, Hannah tucked her arm through Beatrice's. "We got all your letters," she said softly. "Even the first one explaining why you left Jeremy. We would have written back sooner, but your father—" She glanced at her husband, who was engaged in earnest conversation with Ruben, Matthew still cradled expertly in his arms. "He was ashamed, Beatrice. Ashamed that he encouraged you to marry a man who would hurt you." Beatrice squeezed her mother's hand. "It wasn't his fault, Mama. Jeremy showed only his best face during our courtship." "Even so." Hannah's eyes were somber. "Your father made the journey to Prescott after we received your first letter, confronted Jeremy's parents with what their son had done. They refused to believe it, accused you of being unfaithful, of running away with another man's child." She shook her head. "Your father nearly came to blows with Mr. Barlow Sr. It wasn't until we heard from you again, after Matthew's birth, that he was ready to see you, to meet your new husband." The revelation stunned Beatrice. She had imagined her parents disappointed in her choices, perhaps even siding with Jeremy in their desire for her to make the marriage work. To learn that her father had defended her, had confronted the influential Barlow family on her behalf, filled her with grateful warmth. "I'm so glad you're here," she said simply. "Both of you. There's so much to tell you, so much I want you to see." Hannah smiled, her eyes soft with maternal love. "We have time, dear. All the time in the world." As they reached the porch, Beatrice turned to look back at the scene before her, the ranch spreading out in all directions, green with spring promise, the horses in the corral, including Hope, who watched them curiously. Ruben and her father, heads bent together in conversation, Matthew secure in his grandfather's arms. All the pieces of her life, past and present, coming together in harmony. The pregnant woman who had fled abuse, seeking shelter from a storm of violence and fear, had found not just temporary refuge but a permanent home. She had found not just safety but love. She had found not just a protector but a partner. And in finding these things, Beatrice Ironwood had also found herself stronger than she knew, capable of more courage than she had believed possible, worthy of the happiness she now claimed as her birthright. As if sensing her thoughts, Ruben looked up, his eyes meeting hers across the yard. The love shining there was answer enough to any doubts that might have lingered. This was where she belonged. This was home. With a heart full of gratitude, Beatrice stepped into the house to welcome her parents to the new life she had built from the ashes of the old, a life of love, trust, and endless possibility. 2 years later, the Ironwood Ranch thrived under the care of Ruben and Beatrice. Matthew, now a sturdy toddler with his mother's green eyes and an adventurous spirit, had been joined by a baby sister, Rose, born with a shock of wheat blonde hair like her father's and a disposition as sunny as her name suggested. Beatrice's parents had moved to a small house on the edge of the ranch property, Benjamin helping with the cattle operation while Hannah assisted Mrs. Hernandez with household matters and doted on her grandchildren. The arrangement brought joy to all involved, healing old wounds and creating new bonds that strengthened the fabric of their expanding family. As for Jeremy Barlow, he had never returned to Randsburg. Word eventually reached them that he had remarried in St. Louis, a wealthy widow with social connections that satisfied his ambitions. The news brought not pain but relief, the final severing of a tie that had once threatened all they held dear. On a golden autumn afternoon, Ruben and Beatrice stood on the porch of their home, watching as Matthew chased butterflies in the yard, his laughter carrying on the gentle breeze. Rose slept in Beatrice's arms, one tiny hand curled around her mother's finger. "Do you ever think about how it all began?" Ruben asked, his arm around Beatrice's waist. "That day you arrived on our doorstep, half dead from exhaustion." Beatrice leaned into his embrace, remembering the desperation that had driven her to his door, the fear that had been her constant companion. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But mostly I think about everything that came after, the kindness you showed me, the trust we built, the love that grew when neither of us was looking for it." Ruben kissed the top of her head, his heart full to bursting with gratitude for the family they had created together. "I wasn't looking," he agreed, "but I'm thankful every day that I found it anyway. Found you." Matthew ran to them then, clutching a wildflower he had picked, his face alight with the simple joy of discovery. "For Rose," he announced proudly, carefully tucking the blossom into his sleeping sister's blanket. Beatrice smiled at her son, this child who carried another man's blood but Ruben's heart, his values, his name. "That's very sweet of you, Matthew. She'll love it when she wakes up." The boy beamed, then spotted Hope, now a handsome 3-year-old gelding trotting in the paddock. "Can I go see Hope, Papa, please?" "Of course," Ruben said, ruffling his son's dark hair. "Just remember what I taught you about approaching horses." "Slow and quiet," Matthew recited solemnly, "so they know you're a friend." As the boy scampered off toward the paddock, Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. "You're such a wonderful father," she said softly, "to both of them." Ruben's arm tightened around her. "Being their father, being your husband, it's the greatest privilege of my life, Beatrice. One I never thought I'd have." The autumn sun bathed them in golden light as they stood together, watching their son commune with the horse that had been born just before his mother arrived at Ironwood Ranch. A full circle, Beatrice thought. From desperation to hope, from fear to love, from isolation to family. The pregnant woman who had fled abuse, seeking shelter from a storm, had found not just temporary refuge but a permanent home. She had found not just a cowboy but a partner who had taught her to trust again. And in that trust, she had found the strength to love without fear, to build a life rich with joy and possibility. As if reading her thoughts, Ruben turned to face her, his twilight eyes filled with a love that still took her breath away. "I love you, Beatrice Ironwood," he said simply. "Today and all our tomorrows." "And I love you," she replied, standing on tiptoe to press her lips to his. "Today and all our tomorrows." In the yard, Matthew laughed as Hope nuzzled his outstretched hand. In her mother's arms, Rose stirred, opening eyes the color of a summer sky. And in the hearts of Ruben and Beatrice Ironwood, love bloomed eternal, as enduring as the land that had brought them together, as boundless as the Arizona sky above.